What's going on, family? Scrapbook Boxing Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. I did a video of the Madison Square Garden Boxing Inserts Volume 6, Part 2, when I went on to discuss somewhat of a history on Madison Square Garden. And I got into Henry Armstrong's somewhat controversy comment that was made concerning Canelo Alvarez. Now, I don't want to downplay Canelo Alvarez's career or success. Not here to do that. I would never allow Henry Armstrong's legacy to be tarnished or compared when it shouldn't be. And it is my job to bring out some points that will give you an idea on the conversation that is right now controversy. And I want to use Willie Pep's career to somewhat analyze before I get into Henry Armstrong. I want to give you an idea on what real fighters do, real fighters' accomplishments. It's very, very important. Now, I met Willie Pep at least 15 times. Several dinners, affairs, award ceremonies. I've seen him in Canastota, Boxing Hall of Fame several times. So I know Willie Pep's career very well. Know him as a person and personally, not reading a book somewhere. Willie Pep was a dynamic fighter. Henry Armstrong, he passed away in 1988. I met him in 1985. He was a stand-up guy. Unfortunately, he died of 6 different diseases, and he just kind of went downhill. But I spoke with him. We talked boxing, talked about life. R.I.P. to both fighters. So let's talk about Willie Pep for a second so you can get an idea what real fighters do. Now, Willie Pep was named Willow the Wisp. He was born September 19th, 1922 in Hartford, Connecticut. He died November 23rd, 2006 in Rockdale Hill, Connecticut. He stood 5 foot 5 inches and he weighed 123 to 135 and a half pounds. He had a trainer by the name of Bill Gore, who was a good trainer up there in Connecticut. Willie Pep had a fighting career record of 230, 11-1, and 65 knockouts. Now, Willie Pep would begin his boxing career as a professional on July 3rd, 1940. He had 10 fights and began his championship reign in November 1942. And he would fight 6 fights before losing to Sammy Aingot. Let me just stop right there for a moment. 1940 brought in some of the greatest fighters at that decade. Because you had Burt Lytell, Ike Williams, Jimmy Bivens, Ezzard Charles, Sugar Ray Robinson, Jake LaMotta, Willie Pep, so on and so forth. They all turned professional in 1940. And in order for you to do that and become champion, as all of those men did, except for Burt Lytell and Jimmy Bivens, and these 2 men were denied opportunities for title shots. So they would have been champion if given a fair shot. But what's interesting is every last one of those champions that I mentioned who turned professional in 1940, every last one of them, once again, besides Burt Lytell and Jimmy Bivens, they all began their professional career after dynamic amateur careers in 1940, and they all lost their titles in 1951. Every last name that I mentioned to you. Again, with the exception of Burt Lytell and Jimmy Bivens. As for Sammy Aingot was the NBA lightweight champion. He would fight Luther Slugger White for that title. That title was vacant. And Ike Williams, who defeated Sammy Aingot, would have become lightweight champion in 1942, but because of a controversy of Sammy Aingot not making weight, Ike Williams wasn't given that opportunity. But Sammy Aingot had retired Petey Cerrone. Petey Cerrone was a featherweight champion who in 1937 Henry Armstrong would take the title from in Madison Square Garden and become the first black featherweight champion in the United States. Sammy Aingot would stop Willie Pep's reign as undefeated status. And Sammy Aingot was some fighter. So just keep that in mind. Let's take that in consideration. Now, Willie Pep would then begin another undefeated reign from 1943 into the early 1950s. He would have one draw. Pep would step back into the ring with a professional record of 136-1-1 before his second pro loss. And that would be against the great Joe Sandy Sadler. Now, Willie Pep has survived a plane crash. He was offered a settlement. And he turned down a settlement because he wanted to get back in the ring. And he would regain his featherweight championship. See, these are the type of fighters that we're talking about. I'm just giving you an idea of what fighters do. He would have 22 fights in 1941, 22 fights in 1942. Stop right there. You cannot compare fighters of modern time to these men. Whatever the reason, economic reasons, whatever the reasons, they can't fight that many times anymore because of medical reasons, Ali Act, or whatever the case is. But we're talking reality. You can't put their resumes on top of the old-timers' resumes. It would never compare. So you got to keep them in their place. 1942. He would win a featherweight champion of England, July 21st, against Joe Dinner, 12-round victory. He would end his career 242 professional fights. He'd be inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame, 1963, and the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 1990. Now let's take a look at 1942. June 23rd, he would face Joey Archibald. Now, Chalky Wright took the title away from Joey Archibald. Joey Archibald was he was a phenomenal fighter. And he would defeat him in Hartford, Connecticut, 12 rounds. September 1st, 1942, Bobby Poison Ivy, Hartford, Connecticut, 10 rounds knockout. October 16th, he would have another fight with Joey Archibald, Providence, Rhode Island, 10 rounds. November 20th, Albert Chalky Wright again, New York's Madison Square Garden. He would defeat him in 15 rounds. He would become the featherweight champion of the world. Now, all of those men that turned pro in 1940 all could have had an opportunity to win their titles in 1942. Ray Robinson was supposed to be fighting, and he never got his opportunity against Marty Servo. Ike Williams faced Sammy Aingot, but it became a non-title fight because Aingot didn't make weight. Ezzard Charles, all of the men that turned pro in 1940. So keep that in consideration when you try to compare fighters of that time to today. 1943, March 19th, Sammy Aingot, New York, Madison Square Garden. He would lose 10 rounds. And that would be his first loss in 1943. After 62 professional fights. Keep that in mind. April 26, 1943, Jackie Wilson. Now, you had two Jackie Wilson. One was from California, one was from Pittsburgh. This fighter was from Pittsburgh, and he fought him in his hometown and defeated him in 12 rounds. 1944, July 7th, Willie Joyce. Willie Joyce was a phenomenal fighter. Fought him in Chicago. and defeated him in 10 rounds. Manuel Ortiz, who was formerly a bantamweight champion. July 17th, Boston, Massachusetts, defeated him in 10 rounds. July 4th, Lulu Castellino, Waterbury, Connecticut, defeated him in 10 rounds. December 5th, Albert Chalky Wright in Cleveland, Ohio, defeated him in 10 rounds. 1945, February 19th, Phil Terranova, who was a featherweight champion, fought him in New York's Madison Square Garden, defeated him in 15 rounds. It was a title defense. 1946, November 27th, Albert Chalky Wright, Milwaukee, knocked him out in 3 rounds. That was astonishing because Willie Pep only had 65 knockouts in his entire career. But because of his dazzling hand speed and foot speed, he was able to accomplish that feat. 1947, he had 7 fights. 1948, he had 17 bouts, including a victory over Paddy DeMarco. Paddy DeMarco was a lightweight champion when he would defeat Jimmy Carter. Willie Pep would face Teddy Red Top Davis, another good fighter, St. Louis, Missouri, and defeat him in 10 rounds. February 11th, 1949, Pep would run into trouble when he faced Joe Sandy Sadler, New York's Madison Square Garden, 15 rounds. 1950, September 8th, Sandy Sadler, Yankee Stadium. Sandy Sadler will become the featherweight champion of the world. 1951, Carlos Chavez, Bobby Ortiz, Corky Gonzalez. Now this would be the year that Willie Pep would actually lose his title to Sandy Sadler. September 26, 1951, New York. He would lose to him. 9 rounds. Couldn't come out of his corner. And what was interesting was that Pep didn't come out of his corner because he said he twisted his shoulder. You had Ray Miller, who was the referee. And don't you know Willie Pep was laughed at? You see, Dr. Nardiato, who was a doctor at that time, came over to Sandy Sadler's corner and was chuckling and said, that Pep quit. That Pep quit. Because, see, that's something you didn't do at that time. That was unheard of, quitting in the corner. You'd be ostracized for that. And when you see these guys today quitting in a corner, now it's the corner's job to actually stop the fight. And some of these ring death that you see today, the corner is not doing his job. Shout out to Buddy McGirt. But this is the profession that you chose. It needs to be taken seriously. Some of the guys walking around today, they're not fighters. They don't take it seriously. It's a life-changing experience. You know that when you sign in. It's not a game. When you sign in to be a fighter, you're signing your life away. You're signing a waiver. It's a life or death sentence. Another reason why you cannot compare yesterday's fighters to today's fighters. Rules are different. Safety for the fighters, absolutely. But when you make comparisons, we have to be honest and play hardball with this. This is reality. You didn't have those rules back then. Matter of fact, just to give you an idea, Jimmy Carter, he had dropped a fighter by the name of Tommy Collins 8 times. And it was from that point on is when they decided to make the 3 knockdown rule. Standing 8 counts and everything else. You didn't have that back then. When you go back to Jack Dempsey's time, you can stand over a man and hit him while he's down. Let me move on. Completely different men, completely different era. Unbelievable. Let's just get right into Henry Armstrong. Now, Henry Armstrong's name was Henry Jackson. I went in through the whole name changing and everything else in another video. Type in Scrapbook boxing Henry Armstrong for that. But he was called Hammer and Hank, Homicide Hank, Hurricane Hank. He was born December 12, 1912 in Columbus, Georgia. Columbus, Mississippi. Columbus, Mississippi. December 12, 1912. He died October 24th, 1988. He was 75 years of age at the time of his death. Los Angeles, California. He stood 5 foot 5.5 inches and had a 67-inch reach. Let's stop right there. 5 foot 5, 7 inches. Okay, let's keep that in mind. I'll get back to that. He had a fighting record of 181, 151, and 101 knockouts. I want you to keep that in mind. 21 losses with 9 draws. Now, Henry Armstrong in 1937 was voted the Ring Magazine named Fighter of the Year. 1940, Boxing Writers Association had named him Fighter of the Year. 1954, Armstrong was inducted into the Ring Boxing Hall of Fame. 1987, he was among those inducted from the Ring Magazine to the International Boxing Hall of Fame when it was established, 1990. 1995, Henry Armstrong was honored because of his boxing accomplishments into the St. Louis Walk of Fame. In 2007, the Ring Magazine rated Henry Armstrong second greatest fighter in the last 80 years. Think about that. And you had hundreds and hundreds of fighters. Now, Bert Sugar rated Henry Armstrong second greatest fighter, right behind Sugar Ray Robinson. I have Henry Armstrong ranked number 4, behind Sugar Ray Robinson's number 3. ESPN in 2007 ranked Henry Armstrong third of their 50 greatest boxers of all times. Armstrong was in the ring with Fritzy Zivit, Lou Jenkins, Willie Joyce, Sammy Angot, Sugar Ray Robinson, Benny Bass, Mike Belois, Al Bummy Davis, Luther Slugger White, Baby Arizmenzi 5 times. Matter of fact, he would take the California and Mexican lightweight championship belt from Baby Arizmenzi. He would face Midget Wargas, Lou Ambers, Barney Ross, Bo Jack, Seferino Garcia, just to name a few. 1936 to 1940, Henry Armstrong was 59-1-1 with 51 knockouts. Between 1936 and 1940, I want you to think about that. 1937, he would have 27 fights, 26 by knockout. Only fighter he didn't knock out was Aldi Spaulding. He would face Peace DeGrassi. These are the fighters he fought in 1927. Aldi Spaulding, that fight went the distance. Baby Casanova, Tony Chavez, Mike Belois, who was a former champion, Benny Bass, former champion, Charlie Burns, Petey Cerrone, all these men he knocked out. Fought Petey Cerrone in Madison Square Garden, October 29th, in the 6th round. 1938, he was 14-0 with 10 knockouts. Incredible. He would face Baby Arizmenzi, Everett Reitmeyer, March 15th. He would face Baby Arizmenzi again. Fought him in Los Angeles, March 25th. He would face Eddie Zivick in Detroit. He would knock him out in 4 rounds. March 30th, he would face Lou Feldman. Now, he's traveling all over doing this. 1939, he would defend his title. In October, 5 times, 1 month. Phenomenal. November 1938, he would relinquish his featherweight championship belt. I want you to understand something. Henry Armstrong moved up in 1937 after defeating Peter Cerrone, and we know this story already, but I want you to really understand it for what it is. You're looking at a young man who comes from Columbus, Mississippi. Think about the South at that time, what he had to go through. He was working on a railroad, and he saw Kid Chocolate's name on a newspaper, hit him in the leg, and so he made $75,000. Now, when he's working on a railroad, he's not working on a railroad and punch a clock and go home. He's treated as though he's working on the field, picking cotton and everything else. It's a different time. You have to understand this. So when he wants to take a water break, he's not taking a water break. And if you ever seen anyone work on a railroad or a blacksmith, as Bob Fitzsimmons was, shout out to Bob Fitzsimmons, that's hard labor. And let's go back to 5 foot 5.5 inches for a second. That's as tall as Henry Armstrong was. And he weighed about 119 pounds at that time. And he's carrying a mallet that weighed 50 pounds. And he's banging that mallet 8 to 12 hours a day. So he decided, after he read the article in the newspaper, that he would jump on a boxcar, became a hobo, as did Jack Dempsey. It would bring him to Los Angeles. And he would, a lot of people don't know this, but he was trained, Henry Armstrong. Before he made that stop, he was trained by Harry Wiley Sr., one of the greatest trainers of all time, who also trained Sugar Ray Robinson. He had Joe Louis for about a week. And Harry Wiley had so many great fighters in that Grubbs gym. So Henry Armstrong had the pedigree. And he would wind up meeting Eddie Meade and that whole team, George Raff and so on and so forth. And he would begin his career. Canelo Alvarez could never accomplish what Henry Armstrong has accomplished, even if you wanted to. They no longer use thumbed 6-ounce gloves. They never allow 15 rounds of boxing anymore. Henry Armstrong did that 14 scheduled times when he would defend his title within 2 months. Now, he would get knockouts, but they were scheduled for 15 rounds. Henry Armstrong used to shadow box for 15 rounds in the locker room before he came out to fight that night. And he did it against Barney Ross and Bo Jack and Sugar Ray Robinson and Sammy Angot and Fitzy Zivic twice. In fact, he fought Fitzy Zivic 3 times. He did it against Lou Jenkins, Midget Wargas. I mean, unbelievable. Canelo Alvarez doesn't have to step into a rosin box. You see, the shoes they had at that time are not the shoes you have now. They were hard leather. And you would slip and slide unless you had rosin on your feet. So they had to step into a rosin box. Now, I don't know if you ever fell onto rosin after slipping, or your face skidding on rosin, and you have to continue to fight. It comes into a chalky mist. Henry Armstrong had to fight through that. All of these fighters had to fight through that. Canelo Alvarez doesn't have to do that. He couldn't try and do a shoulder roll or anything like that because he only had 3 strands. for ring ropes. You didn't have 4 like you do today. You didn't have padding on the poles like you do today. Because in 1962, Benny Kid Paret, R.I.P. to him, when he faced Emil Griffith, had banged his head on a pole. Henry Armstrong went from feather to welter and back down to lightweight. Now, I just want to clear one thing up about the ducking that's been spreaded around Henry Armstrong's career. The only fighter he didn't fight that he could have fought was Coco Kid. He didn't fight Coco Kid. Coco Kid deserved a shot at Armstrong. Got to understand once again, it's not Armstrong's decision like it is today. They were ran by their trainers and their managers. All they did was fight. Canelo can sit down at the negotiating table today and make all the terms and agreements and, put all these things in his contract. You couldn't do that back then. You couldn't drop the belt and pick it back up at your convenience back then. You see, all the men that Canelo Alvarez fought, Henry Armstrong's fought them already. What do I mean by that? All these belts, they would have been ranked number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. However many belts you have, they would have been lined up. And Henry Armstrong cleaned out that division in 1937. So technically, Henry Armstrong had all of those belts that Canelo Alvarez has today. 1939. The number 1 rank was Fritzy Zivik. Number 2 was Holman Williams. Number 3 was Milt Aaron. Number 4 was Ernie Redrick. Number 5 was Charlie Burley. Number 6 was Mike Kaplan. And number 7 was Coco Kid. Now let's break this down for a moment. Holman Williams was ranked number 2. But he lost to Fritzy Zivik on December 1st, 1939. So it took him out of the rankings. Had he defeated Fritzy Zivik, he would have been ranked number 1 and got a shot at Henry Armstrong. But he lost to Fritzy Zivik in 1939, December 1st. So it took him out of the ranking. Only Roderick got a fight. And the reason why he got a fight, May 25th, 1939, he defeated Holman Williams. Now, number 7 rank, Coco Kid, January 11th, 1940. Coco Kid would then again face Holman Williams and defeat him. So Coco Kid should have been then ranked number 2. But he wasn't. But because he was ranked number 7 and Ernie Roderick was ranked number 4, he got the shot. 1938. Number 1 rank was Sefrino Garcia. Number 2 rank was Fritzy Zivik. Number 3 rank was Charlie Burley. Number 4 rank was Ernie Roderick. Now, Sefrino Garcia got his title shot in 1938 with Henry Armstrong. And Henry Armstrong defeated Sefrino Garcia. And I'm going to get to that 1940 fight in a moment. So then, Fritzy Zivik, who was ranked number 2, fought Charlie Burley, who was ranked number 3, and defeated Charlie Burley. So it took Charlie Burley out of the rankings. So now Fritzy Zivik moved up to number 1 in 1938. That's why Fritzy Zivik got the shot in 1940. After Armstrong picked off Ernie Roderick. Now, Sefrino Garcia fought Henry Armstrong in 1940 for the middleweight championship belt. And George Blake, who was a referee, made it very, very clear that Armstrong wasn't going to win that fight because he, at that time, You didn't take points away. You took rounds away. So Armstrong had almost 5 rounds taken away from him because George Blake took away rounds for so-called holding, hitting low, and headbutting. He never indicated what he was doing in the ring. He just held up Seferino Garcia's hand and flew out of the ring. He flew out of the arena. He was called back by the promoters and the commission. And he made up an excuse that I took rounds away from Armstrong for holding, hitting, and headbutting, and low blows. And as I look at that fight, as I go back, I didn't see any of that. So the middleweight championship belt was taken away from Henry Armstrong, because everyone that was there said that Henry Armstrong had won that fight. So Canelo Alvarez, who, when you add on to his belt legacy, are fighting these junior titles, super titles, silver titles. If he was fighting in Henry Armstrong's time, he would have been like a Rocky Castellani or someone. He would have been an 8-round fighter, 6-round fighter, 10-round fighter. Why? Because Madison Square Garden, you didn't just get into Madison Square Garden that easy. He would have been fighting in St. Nicholas Arena, Broadway Arena, Sunnyside Garden, Eastern Parkway, with all the other great fighters at that time. So we have to put some respect on Henry Armstrong's name. The accomplishments that he made shouldn't be played with. You're talking about a black fighter at that time who had no rights, who couldn't sit at certain counters, who as champion didn't have the privileges that everyone around him had. But yet through all of that, he accomplished what he accomplished. Salute to Henry Armstrong. Salute to the great fighters at that time. Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. All great fights and all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. Canelo Alvarez is a very, very good fighter. He's doing great for his time. I take absolutely nothing away from Canelo Alvarez. I wish him all success. But don't put him in the name of Henry Armstrong. No comparison. Salute.